Billionaire returns to Hong Kong after 52 years of abandonment. But his mother, I found her, but 50 years too late. That's what billionaire Jonathan Reeves whispered under the pouring rain. Standing before the staircase where he'd once been left as a baby, the city around him glittered with neon and power. But in his eyes there was only loss. The man who owned towers of glass and fleets of jets was now trembling before a cracked wall, chasing the ghost of a mother he never knew. What would you have done in his place, if all your power couldn't buy back the moment you were abandoned? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive, and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you his story. Jonathan Reeves was the kind of man people wrote about, but never really knew. At 52, he was the billionaire founder of Reeves Technologies, a name whispered with awe in every boardroom from New York to Tokyo. He owned towers of glass and steel, fleets of jets, and a private island where the sea shimmered like silver. Yet behind that flawless image lived a silence. No headline ever reached the silence of a man who had never known where he came from. Jonathan Reeves stood in front of the staircase, like a man facing the ghost of his own beginning. The air was heavy with rain, but he barely noticed the water dripping from his hair onto the collar of his suit. He had been photographed in front of grander places, stock exchanges, boardrooms, private jets, but never anywhere that made him feel this small. This was the exact spot where someone had left him 52 years ago, crying, nameless, wrapped in a thin blue blanket. For a moment, the billionaire forgot how to breathe. He whispered into the darkness that surrounded him. They said this was where she left me, wrapped in blue, crying under the rain. The words came out like a confession to no one in particular, carried away by the sound of distant traffic. He had imagined this moment for years. Yet standing here now, it didn't feel like discovery. It felt like exposure, as if the walls around his carefully built life had suddenly gone transparent. His reflection flickered in a puddle beneath the staircase. The polished shoes, the tailored coat, the expensive watch that ticked precisely with each second symbols of control, power, and permanence. Yet, inside, he felt none of those things. The more he achieved, the more this place pulled at him like an old wound that refused to close. What kind of mother leaves her child like this? What kind of world makes her believe that's the only choice she has? Jonathan's throat tightened as an image formed in his mind. A young woman in soaked clothes, hair plastered to her face, clutching a newborn against her chest, her hands shaking, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She looks around one last time before setting the baby down. She touches the small face once, then steps back, watching as the rain begins to soak through the blue cloth. She hesitates, turns away, and disappears into the storm. He had lived 52 years trying not to see that image, but tonight he couldn't stop it. His jaw trembled. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe through the ache. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of control negotiations, takeovers, empires built on logic. But pain had its own language, one that no deal could silence. He crouched down, letting his fingertips brush the damp cement. This was where it began, where he stopped being someone's son and became someone else's project. The world saw a self-made man. He knew better. You can build everything, he thought. but not the reason you were left behind. The rain fell harder. He didn't move. A stray cat darted across the alley, startling him for a moment. But then he smiled bitterly. Even the stray had somewhere to return to. He had mansions on both coasts. A yacht. A penthouse overlooking Central Park. But none of those places ever felt like home. Home was a question that started here and never got answered. A faint hum of traffic echoed through the night. Somewhere above him, a flickering light blinked like a heartbeat out of rhythm. He realized that for all his billions, he could not buy this one thing, the truth of why she left. Maybe she was young. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought she was saving him. But the thought that haunted him most was that maybe she had looked back once, just to make sure he was crying loud enough to be found. He stood there until the rain blurred everything. His vision, his thoughts, even the memory he had never lived. When he finally turned away, his chest felt hollow but alive. It was as if this broken staircase had taken something from him and given something back. Maybe not answers, but the permission to start asking again. When Jonathan returned to New York, he thought the trip to Hong Kong would quiet the storm inside him. But it didn't. It only made the silence louder. Every meeting, every success story about Reeves Technologies sounded hollow. The applause from shareholders felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. At night, when the city outside his penthouse glowed with neon and noise, he still heard the echo of rain hitting concrete and the faint cry of a baby he never remembered being. The television interview was supposed to be routine, a celebration of his company's 25th anniversary. Cameras flashed. Laughter filled the studio. And Jonathan Reeves, the man everyone admired, sat perfectly composed. He knew how to smile on cue, how to make power look effortless. But then the interviewer leaned forward and asked it lightly, almost casually, "You were adopted in Hong Kong, right? Have you ever thought about finding your real family?" The words hit him like cold glass breaking inside his chest. For a moment, he forgot the cameras, the audience, even where he was. His hand tightened around the armrest until his knuckles whitened. He forced a smile, the kind he had used to survive countless negotiations, and replied with a polite answer about gratitude and destiny. The audience clapped. The host moved on, but underneath the desk, his fingers trembled. After the show, Jonathan walked straight out of the studio. The assistant tried to catch up, asking if he was okay, but he didn't respond. In the car, he sat motionless, his reflection flickering in the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of color. One question kept repeating in his mind. Why did it still hurt after 50 years? When he got home, he didn't turn on the lights. The penthouse glowed faintly from the skyline outside, the glass walls turning him into both prisoner and observer. He poured himself a drink but never took a sip. His hand shook slightly, the amber liquid rippling. He stared at his reflection in the window, a man built from discipline, precision, and willpower. But beneath the surface was that same abandoned child. He whispered into the glass, "Why can't they just talk about my company? Why does everyone care about that staircase?" His voice cracked, and the words faded into the quiet hum of the city. He set the glass down, staring at his hand in the soft blue light. It was trembling again. 50 years, he muttered, almost to himself. So why does it still hurt? His voice broke, the question hanging in the air like smoke. He clenched his fist, but the tremor only grew stronger. For the first time in decades, he realized how fragile his control really was. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor. Jonathan stood there, breathing hard, the shards glinting at his feet like fragments of memory. He thought of the staircase again. The rain, the silence. No matter how high he had climbed, he could still feel the weight of that night pressing against him. He had built an empire from nothing, but maybe that nothing had always been him. The next morning, a phone call shattered the silence. His father had passed away in his sleep. Jonathan said nothing for a long time. The phone pressed to his ear. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strange, distant. "Thank you for calling." Then he hung up and stared out the window as the city moved on without him. Days later, he stood in his father's study. The air smelled faintly of old books and tobacco. The walls were lined with memories he didn't remember sharing. He opened the safe that had been locked for years and found a single envelope inside, sealed carefully, with his name written in trembling handwriting. "For Jonathan, when I'm gone." He held it in both hands. His fingers shook again, the same way they had under the studio lights. He knew that whatever was inside would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the night he was left beneath the rain. The letter had been sitting on his desk for days, but Jonathan couldn't bring himself to finish it. Every time he unfolded it, the first line hit him like a blow. His father's handwriting trembled across the page, and with each word, the world he thought he knew began to tilt. He had built his entire life on discipline, reason, and facts. But now, facts were what hurt the most. He finally forced himself to read it from start to end. His father wrote about the year 1973, when he was a young American medic stationed in Hong Kong. One stormy night, a woman arrived at the hospital, soaked, bleeding, barely able to stand. She was clutching a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. She refused to give her name. She only said, "Save him. Please. Promise-me he'll live." Then she collapsed. His father treated her, but she disappeared the next morning, leaving nothing but the baby in the nursery. Jonathan stopped reading for a moment. His pulse hammered in his throat. His father had taken the baby to an orphanage, intending to report the case. But when he returned to the hospital later that week, he found out the woman had come back looking for her child, only to be told the baby had been sent away for adoption. By the time his father reached the orphanage again, the paperwork had already been processed. The boy had been listed as abandoned, unnamed. The father wrote that he never saw her again. He tried to find her, but the city swallowed her whole. Jonathan pressed the paper against his chest. He could feel his heartbeat through it, hard and uneven. So she hadn't left him to die. She had left him to live. And the man who had raised him, the one he called father, had carried that secret for 50 years. He imagined the burden, the guilt, the quiet nights his father must have sat alone, wondering if he did the right thing. But the revelation burned. All these years, he had looked into that man's eyes and believed they were built on honesty. The same man who taught him that truth was the foundation of trust had hidden the biggest truth of all. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered to the empty room. "Why did you make me grow up thinking I was unwanted?" The silence that followed was unbearable. He read the rest of the letter. His father had written that he wanted to tell him many times, but couldn't bear to reopen the wound. He thought that by protecting him from the past, he was giving him freedom. "I didn't want you to live defined by what she couldn't do," he wrote. "I wanted you to live for what you could become. And you did. I'm proud of you, son. But I'm sorry for what it cost you." Jonathan folded the letter again, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He hated that he still called him father. Even now, after learning the truth, he hated that love and betrayal could exist in the same breath. The rain came again that night, and when he looked out from his window, it felt like the same storm his father had described. The streets glistened under the city lights, just like the streets in Hong Kong. He remembered the funeral and the sound of rain falling on the casket. He had stood there motionless while others cried, thinking he was strong. Now he knew he wasn't strong. He was just numb. He closed his eyes, and memories came in flashes. His father teaching him how to tie a tie before his first business meeting. The way he used to sit quietly by his bed when Jonathan had nightmares as a boy. The night he gave him his first watch and said, "You'll never be late for your destiny." Every one of those moments felt different now. They were no longer lessons from a father to a son. They were penance from a man who carried a secret he couldn't undo. Jonathan sank into his chair and covered his face with his hands. His breath came in shallow bursts. He wasn't angry anymore, just empty. He wanted to forgive him, but forgiveness required understanding, and understanding came too late. He would have given anything to ask him one question. Did you ever find peace? He picked up the letter one last time. At the bottom, there was a single line written differently from the rest, as if his father had added it later. If you ever go back to Hong Kong, start where she left you. You might find what I never could. Jonathan stared at those words until the ink seemed to move. He realized the letter wasn't an ending. It was an invitation. His father was gone, but the woman who had fought to save him might still be out there, or at least her truth was. He looked up, eyes glistening, and whispered, "I'll go, not as your son, not as her loss, but as the man who finally wants to know who he is." Jonathan hadn't planned the trip. It simply happened the way memories sometimes do, sudden, unstoppable, and quiet. Weeks after reading his father's letter, he found himself sitting on a plane bound for Hong Kong, staring out the window at a sky that looked like the color of old grief. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a trembling woman in the rain, her hands shaking as she laid down a baby wrapped in blue. He didn't know her face, but somehow his heart did. Claire, his assistant, sat across the aisle and spoke softly. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "Sir." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the clouds below. "I've spent my whole life building a future. Claire, maybe it's time I meet my past." His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, like something inside him had already broken long ago. When the plane landed, the air felt thick, heavy with humidity and memory. The car ride from the airport blurred into silence. Jonathan watched the city move past the narrow streets. The smell of food stands, the sound of traffic mixed with rain. It wasn't the city that overwhelmed him. It was the strange ache of recognition. Somewhere deep down, it felt like the place had been waiting for him all along. He asked the driver to stop near Kowloon and stepped out alone. The street was narrow, lined with small shops and flickering signs. He held the photograph in his hand, the old staircase where he had been found 52 years ago. His fingers brushed against the edge of the photo, tracing the faint outline, as if touching the past itself. He looked up at the real staircase, now cracked and faded. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing. It felt as if the air itself carried the sound of that long-ago cry. Across the street, a small food stall glowed under a flickering light. An elderly woman was serving noodles to a young boy, her hands moving gently, her voice soft. Jonathan walked toward her, his heart thudding like he was approaching something sacred. When she turned to face him, he froze. There was something in her eyes, kindness, exhaustion, and an old sadness that felt strangely familiar. He showed her the photograph. "Excuse me, Mum, do you know this place?" The woman took the photo, squinted, then looked up at him again. Her hand trembled slightly. "This baby," she whispered. "My brother told me about him once." Jonathan's breath caught. His throat tightened, as if his body already knew what she would say next. She continued slowly. "It was raining that night. A woman came running, holding a baby wrapped in blue. She was crying. My brother was just a boy, but he remembered her face. She kissed the baby, left him there, and ran." Her voice broke a little at the end, and Jonathan felt his vision blur. He stared at her face, at the wrinkles around her eyes, the faint tremor in her lips, and for a fleeting second, he saw his mother, not in her features, but in the tenderness behind them, the kind of love that still carries pain. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but his words wouldn't come. "Did she ever come back?" he managed to whisper. The woman shook her head slowly. "No one ever saw her again. But my brother said she looked back once, before disappearing into the rain." Jonathan lowered his eyes, the photo trembling in his hands. He didn't know if the rain on his face came from the sky or from himself. That image of a woman looking back one last time struck him harder than anything else. It wasn't abandonment anymore. It was love trapped in a moment of despair. He looked up at the woman again. "Thank you," he said softly. She smiled faintly, and for a moment, the world seemed to blur. In her eyes, he saw the reflection of every mother who had ever loved and lost. As he turned back to the staircase, the sound of the city faded. The neon signs flickered, but all he could hear was his heartbeat and the whisper of rain. He walked slowly toward the steps, his hand brushing the cold rail. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man returning to his past. He felt like a child being found. The old woman's story left Jonathan restless. That single sentence, "she looked back once," kept repeating in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. Before leaving her stall, she had placed a trembling hand on his arm and whispered that her brother might remember more. His name was Mr. Yu. He lived nearby, though his health wasn't good. Jonathan thanked her and followed her directions through a narrow alley, his heart beating harder with each step. The building where Mr. Yu lived was small and grey, its walls cracked and marked by decades of humidity. The woman knocked softly on the metal door before it creaked open. A thin man in his 70s stood inside, his eyes pale with age, but still sharp. He looked at Jonathan for a long moment, then nodded for him to come in. The apartment was dim, filled with the smell of damp air and old paper. A small fan hummed weakly in the corner, stirring the heat but not the heaviness. Jonathan sat down across from him. The old man's hands shook as he poured tea into chipped cups. He asked quietly if the woman downstairs had told him why he was here. "Mr. Yu nodded. "I was there that night," he said slowly. "I was only 10. I still remember her face. She was young. She ran past me, crying, holding something close to her chest." Jonathan's throat tightened. The sound of the rain outside the window mixed with the old man's trembling voice, and for a moment, the years between them disappeared. "Mr. Yu looked down, his eyes glistening. She stopped near the stairs. I hid behind the corner because I was scared." She kissed the baby's forehead, whispered something I couldn't hear at first. Then I heard it. Please. Someone find him a better life. Please. The words hit Jonathan like a wave. He felt his pulse in his fingertips, his chest, his throat. The old man continued, almost in a whisper. She placed him down carefully, like she was afraid to hurt him. Then she turned and ran into the storm. But before she disappeared, she looked back. Just once, long enough for me to see her eyes. They were full of love and terror. Jonathan couldn't speak. He tried to hold his breath steady, but it came out uneven. His hands trembled around the teacup, the liquid inside rippling. "Mr. Yu looked at him quietly, as if he understood the storm inside the man sitting before him. "I never forgot that night," he said. "People in the neighborhood said she worked at the textile factory near the river. Poor, sick. Some said she never left the city. Others said she died not long after." Jonathan lowered his head. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He saw again the image that had haunted him since childhood, the faceless woman, the blue blanket, the rain. Only now it had sound, a voice, a plea. He thought of all the years he had hated her for leaving, and now he realized she might have loved him enough to let him go. The realization cut deeper than any anger ever had. He stood slowly, walking toward the small window. The rain streaked the glass. The city lights blurred behind it. His reflection looked older, fragile, and human. He turned back to the old man. His voice, barely a whisper. "She gave me life and spent hers in silence." "Mr. Yu nodded gently, his eyes wet. "Sometimes silence is love too," he said. Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the truth settle in. For the first time, the word mother didn't sound like an ache. It sounded like forgiveness. He thanked the old man and stepped outside. The rain had eased to a mist, soft against his face. He looked up toward the night sky, his heart heavy but alive. The alley was quiet, except for the hum of the city breathing around him. And somewhere deep inside, he felt something shift. He had spent his life searching for the reason he was left behind. Now he understood. He wasn't left. He was saved. Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about the woman's words. She looked back once before, disappearing into the rain. That single image haunted him more than anything. It followed him through airports, into boardrooms, into the quiet hours of the night, when he stared at the city lights and felt the weight of being someone's unfinished story. That was when he contacted Roots of Hope, an organization that helped reconnect lost families through DNA tracing. For the first time, Jonathan wasn't trying to control the outcome of something. He was trying to surrender to it. The process felt clinical, almost cruel in its simplicity. A cotton swab, a sealed vial, a digital form. He sat in a white lab surrounded by the faint hum of machines and the soft tapping of keyboards. Everything smelled like antiseptic, clean, cold, detached. The young technician smiled politely as she labeled the sample. "Results usually take a few weeks," she said. Jonathan nodded, his expression unreadable, but his hand trembled slightly as he took the receipt. Weeks after 52 years. What were a few more weeks? Back home, time turned against him. The ticking of the clock filled every corner of his penthouse, louder than traffic, louder than thought. He tried to work but couldn't focus. His calendar stayed full, but he didn't show up. The empire he had built no longer demanded his presence. The past did. He found himself sitting by the window late at night, watching raindrops slide down the glass in slow, deliberate lines. Each drop hit the sill with a sound that matched his heartbeat. Every morning, he checked his email before even getting out of bed. Every evening, he checked it again before turning off the light. Nothing yet. The waiting became its own kind of pain. Quiet, slow, almost merciful, but relentless. One night, unable to sleep, he sat at his desk, staring at the screen. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, then began typing an email to the organization. Any update on case 4792? He stopped halfway, deleted it, typed again, and deleted once more. It felt desperate, childish. So he just sat there, his hand resting on the mouse, eyes on the clock. The second hand ticked forward, and each movement felt like another reminder of how long he had been waiting to be seen. The rain began again outside, soft at first, then steady. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass. For years, he had used rain as a metaphor for loss. But tonight, it felt different. It sounded like a heartbeat, steady, certain, alive. He whispered into the reflection of his own face, "I'm still here. If you're out there, I'm still here." Then, one afternoon, the sound he had been waiting for came, a single ping from his inbox. His pulse quickened before he even opened it. The email subject read, "Preliminary match, Roots of Hope." His hand shook as he clicked it open. The text blurred for a moment as he blinked hard, trying to steady his breath. "We have identified a genetic connection within the Lee family. A relative residing in San Francisco has submitted matching DNA." Jonathan's breath caught. San Francisco. He read it again and again, each word sinking deeper, like pebbles dropped into still water. Then he saw it, a contact email, at the bottom of the message, Amy Lee. He picked up his phone, but his hand was trembling so badly that he almost dropped it. He typed slowly, erasing and retyping every few words. "Hello, Amy. My name is Jonathan Reeves. I recently received a DNA result from Roots of Hope. I believe I might be connected to your family." He paused, staring at the blinking cursor. Then he deleted half the sentence. It sounded too formal, too distant, like a business transaction. He tried again. "I think your grandmother might be the woman I've been searching for." He stared at the screen, the soft glow lighting his face. His thumb hovered over send. His heartbeat was loud enough to drown out the rain outside. Then, finally, he pressed it. The message whooshed away into the digital void. Jonathan set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The silence afterward was unbearable. No reply. No sound. Just the ticking of the clock. He looked toward the window again, where raindrops kept falling in perfect rhythm. Each drop seemed to whisper back the same thing: "Wait." Urspast. Then his phone buzzed softly beside him. He hesitated, afraid to look, as if seeing the message might undo him completely. He finally turned it over. The notification read, "Email from Amy Lee." He opened it with shaking hands. The message was short, hesitant, written with kindness that reached straight through the screen. "My grandmother has been looking for her baby boy her whole life. She lost him in Hong Kong. During the storm, she never stopped hoping he was alive." Jonathan's breath trembled. His hand covered his mouth as tears rose. Uninvited, unstoppable. 50 years of silence collapsed into a few sentences. He closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly against his chest. Outside, the rain kept falling, the rhythm steady, like the heartbeat of a child that had finally been heard. Jonathan didn't sleep the night before his flight to San Francisco. The email from Amy Lee replayed in his head over and over, each line striking a different chord of hope and fear. He had faced investors, courts, and crises that could crush entire empires. Yet nothing had ever made his hands shake like this. He wasn't going to negotiate or command. He was going to meet the woman who gave him life. When the plane landed, the air smelled of rain. The driver took him straight to the hospital. A quiet building overlooking the bay. The sky was heavy with clouds, and through the glass doors he could see nurses moving softly like ghosts. He walked down the corridor, past the antiseptic smell, the white walls, and the sound of distant heart monitors. Each step felt heavier than the last. Amy met him at the entrance to the room. Her eyes were kind but tired. She whispered that her grandmother was sleeping, but she woke often. Calling a name no one understood. Jonathan nodded, but his legs felt weak. Through the half-open door, he saw her, Mei Li, a small, fragile woman lying under a thin blanket. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, their soft beeping marking the seconds she had left. Her hair was silver, her hands thin and still. But even from across the room, something inside him recognized her. He stood frozen in the doorway, afraid that if he moved, the moment might disappear. Amy touched his arm gently. She said her grandmother had lost a baby boy in Hong Kong. The hospital told her the child didn't survive. She never believed it, but she had no proof. She had carried that grief through her whole life. Jonathan took a deep breath, then stepped forward. The floor creaked slightly. Mei Li stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy but alert. Searching. For a moment, they landed on him, and she gasped softly. Her voice came out as a whisper. "Your eyes. I know those eyes." Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He moved closer, kneeling beside her bed. She reached out, a trembling hand. He took it carefully, as if afraid she might fade if he touched her too hard. She traced his face with her gaze, her fingers hovering near his cheek. "I prayed for this," she said, her lips trembling. "I prayed that someone would bring you back to me." Jonathan's throat closed. He wanted to speak, but words caught behind years of silence. He finally managed to whisper, "They told me you left me." She shook her head weakly, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "No, my son, I never left you. They told me you had died in the storm. I begged to see you, but they said it was too late." She stopped to catch her breath, her hand tightening around his. "I came back to the hospital every night for a week. I looked for your cry in the wind. Then I left that city with nothing but your name in my heart." Jonathan pressed his forehead against her hand. The sound of the heart monitor faded into the background. Everything else disappeared. "I hated you for half my life," he whispered, voice breaking. "I thought you didn't want me." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I never stopped wanting you. You were never a mistake. You were my prayer, answered too soon." He wept openly now, his tears falling onto her hand. She brushed his cheek gently, her strength fading with each breath. "I'm sorry," he said, "for taking so long." She shook her head slowly. "No, you came exactly when I needed you most." Her breathing grew shallower, her words quieter. "You found me before the night did." Jonathan could feel her pulse weaken beneath his fingertips. The rain outside began to fall harder, tapping softly against the hospital window. He leaned closer, holding her hand to his chest as if his heartbeat could keep her here. "I found you," he whispered. "You can rest now." "Mama." Her lips curved into the smallest smile. Her eyes closed, and the line on the monitor flattened into silence. He stayed there for a long time, his hand still wrapped around hers. The room smelled faintly of rain and medicine. The nurse came in quietly, but he didn't move. He just looked at her one last time, memorizing the peace on her face. After 52 years, the woman who had carried him through a storm could finally sleep. Jonathan stood and walked to the window. The city below was glistening under the rain. The ocean stretched beyond the horizon, endless and calm. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel lost. He pressed his hand against the glass, eyes filled with tears. "I found you," he whispered again, as if she could still hear. A year had passed since the night Jonathan whispered goodbye to his mother. Time had not dulled the memory. It had only softened its edges. He still visited her grave every month, sometimes bringing blue flowers, sometimes nothing at all. Just silence. But somewhere between grief and gratitude, something inside him began to shift. The emptiness that had once followed him like a shadow now felt lighter, replaced by a quiet purpose. That purpose became the Blue Blanket Foundation. He named it after the piece of cloth that once held him in the rain, the last trace of a mother's love before the world took him away. The foundation's mission was simple yet profound: to give children who had been abandoned the one thing he had always longed for: a chance to be seen, to be loved, and to belong. He poured his resources, his influence, and most of all, his heart into it. On the day of the foundation's launch, the auditorium in New York was filled with journalists, donors, and families who had come to listen. The air buzzed with cameras clicking and whispers of expectation. Jonathan stood at the podium, dressed in a simple grey suit. No spotlight, no grandeur, just a man who had finally learned how to be human again. When he began to speak, his voice was steady but tender. He said he had spent his life building towers of glass and steel, thinking that success could drown out the sound of an unanswered question. He told them that no matter how much wealth a man accumulates, he can never buy back a history he lost or forgiveness he never gave. He paused, looking down at the crowd, at the young children sitting in the front row, holding small blue blankets the foundation had given them. His eyes filled, but this time with peace, not pain. After the ceremony, he didn't return to his office or his penthouse. Instead, he booked a flight back to Hong Kong. The city welcomed him with its familiar rhythm, the hum of traffic, the glow of neon, the smell of rain on concrete. He went straight to Kowloon, to the same staircase that had haunted him his entire life. Only now, it no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a beginning. He knelt down and placed a bouquet of white lilies on the step where he had once been found. The sunlight was breaking through the clouds, warm and golden, touching the cracked cement like a blessing. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for all the children who would never know why they were left behind. Then he smiled, realizing that somewhere, someone would find them, just as he had been found. The sound of laughter caught his attention. A group of children were playing nearby, chasing a ball through puddles, their shoes splashing water that sparkled in the light. Their laughter echoed down the alley, filling the same space that had once known only silence. Jonathan watched them for a long time, his eyes glistening. It was as if life itself had come full circle. The place where abandonment once lived now carried joy. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years lift off his shoulders. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and renewal. He thought of his mother's last smile, of her trembling hand in his. of her voice whispering that he was never a mistake. He finally understood. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or erasing pain. It was about allowing the past to find its peace through love. As he stood to leave, the clouds parted completely, and sunlight poured across the old staircase. He looked up, eyes filled with quiet gratitude. Maybe forgiveness, he thought, isn't about making peace with the past. Maybe it's about letting the past finally make peace with us. Then he turned away, his steps calm, his heart full, as the laughter of children followed him down the street. Jonathan Reeves spent half his life building an empire, but it took losing everything that couldn't be bought to find what truly mattered. From the cold silence of power to the quiet warmth of forgiveness, he learned that peace doesn't come from success. It comes from understanding the love that once let us go. His story reminds us that it's never too late to forgive, to return home, or to love again. He built an empire, but could never rebuild the moment his mother let him go. If this story touched you, share it with someone you love. Thanks for listening, and welcome to Emotional Echoes.